Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features. Its steep cliffs and deep bays form a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Earlier today, we're being told tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary fin disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway.
At the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, National Trust rangers swore they watched a slab of solid basalt swing open like a door, then seal itself shut again, leaving no crack, no seam, no proof it had ever moved. Nobody believed them. But one former field archaeologist, Kieran Orya, studied their footage and saw what they missed. So he drove to that cliff alone and bored a camera straight into the chamber behind the moving stone door. And the moment the lens pushes through, the moment it finds what's hanging in that sealed dark, even a man who trusted nothing is left speechless.
This is one of Northern Ireland's most remarkable and popular sites, a place of science and mythology.
The first witnesses. Let me back up, because you need to understand how a careful man ended up alone on that coastline in the first place. It started with the people whose job it was to watch that cliff. Rangers, tourists, enthusiasts who knew the site better than anyone alive. They were the first researchers on this, the ones who documented it before a single outsider got involved. Their clips were short, shaky, passed hand to hand because no institution would touch them. And they all said the same impossible thing. A section of the rock face had opened. Not cracked, not crumbled. Opened the way a door opens, and then closed again behind whatever passed through.
We have some footage that has been taken on a mobile phone. Let's have a look at it.
Look.
Most people dismissed it within minutes, and honestly, you would have too. Basalt doesn't open. It fractures, it collapses, it weathers down over centuries. What it does not do is move as a single clean piece and then settle back into stillness without leaving a mark. So the clips got waved away. A hoax, a trick of editing. The kind of thing that gets 10,000 views and then disappears into the bottom of a feed. But Kieran Orya didn't wave it away. He's a former field archaeologist. Years of subsurface surveys and structural analysis across Ireland before he left the profession entirely. Methodical. Data first, story second, if ever. No fringe theories, no speculation. The type of man who measured twice and published nothing he couldn't defend in front of people who wanted him to be wrong. And when he watched what the Rangers filmed, he didn't see a hoax. He saw something that made a cautious man stop being cautious. He saw an edge that was too clean. The edge too clean. Here's what he saw, and here's why it mattered enough to break a habit he'd kept his whole career. Orya wasn't watching the movement. Everyone else was watching the movement. The slab swinging, the impossible hinge of it. He was watching the edge, the exact line where the rock had separated from the rest of the rock. And you need one thing about basalt for this to land the way it landed for him. Basalt forms when lava cools fast. That fast cooling is what builds those famous columns at the Causeway, the tight geometric pillars packed shoulder to shoulder. But that geometry comes from stress fractures, and stress fractures are messy at the microscopic level, even when they look clean from a few feet away.
The 40,000 interlocking basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway were actually formed by a volcanic event more than 50 million years ago.
So, when a piece of basalt moves, any piece for any reason, it has to leave a trail, crushed dust, microfractures spidering along the break, a seam where two stone faces ground against each other. Something. Always something. In that footage, there was nothing. No crumbling, no debris, no distortion in the surrounding stone. Just a controlled shift and then stillness. Like the rock had been built to do exactly that and nothing else. So, Orya went back through the Rangers' clips frame by frame, hunting for the trick. A compression artifact. A clever cut. A shadow pretending to be a moving boundary. He didn't find it, and the longer he looked, the worse it got. Because careful looking is supposed to expose the lie. Here, it only exposed how few lies there were to find. That's the moment a man who had never chased a fringe theory in his life decided to drive to a coastline alone and tell no one. The weak point. So, what does a cautious man do when the careful answer runs out? He goes looking for a way in. And he does not go looking where you'd expect. The equipment wasn't unusual for subsurface work. A professional-grade rotary hammer built for heavy masonry, fitted with a 40mm carbide-tipped masonry bit, extended through a series of couplings so it could reach real depth without widening the entry hole. That last part mattered to him. A narrow bore meant minimal surface disturbance and less risk of bringing the rock down around him. But the drill was never the important part. The location was. And here's where Orya did the thing that tells you he was serious. He did not try to breach the visible face of the cliff where the movement happened. That's the obvious move, and it would have been close to impossible. Basalt, that thick, resists direct drilling for hours, maybe days, and forcing through it risks collapsing everything around you. So he didn't look for the door, he looked for weakness, because basalt doesn't form as one clean block. As lava cools, it contracts, and that contraction leaves layered densities and pockets of internal stress that vary from one section to the next. You can't see any of that from the surface, but a man trained to read grain orientation, fracture alignment, the direction the ancient thermal flow once moved, he can infer it. So that's what Orya did, for hours, with his bare hands. No scanners, no ground-penetrating radar, just touch and measurement and the way the surface caught the light. He traced faint shifts in texture and color, narrowing it down, hunting for a spot where the rock would be thinner, or at least less willing to fight him. And the point he finally chose wasn't against the stone door itself. It was close to it. Close enough that if anything ran parallel to that section of cliff behind the door, his bore might punch straight into it. Close enough that he was, in a real sense, knocking on the wall right beside a door that opened on its own. If you're already leaning in, do me one quick favor before this goes where it goes. Hit subscribe. A huge number of people watching right now haven't, and these are exactly the stories that get buried when a channel like this one stops surfacing them. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it makes sure the next door we open finds you too. Now. He set the drill against the weak point. And what happened next happened faster than he could react. When resistance vanished, the first layer behaved exactly the way it was supposed to. Dense, unyielding. The resistance pushed back through the tool with a steady, predictable force, and the vibration was textbook. Solid volcanic rock, no cavities, no fractures, nothing strange. The dust coming out of the borehole was the fine, dark particulate you'd expect from basalt under stress. He worked it slow, holding pressure, adjusting angle, easing off when the heat climbed. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Nothing changed, until it did. And it didn't change gradually. There was no warning, no softening, no shift in the sound of the cut. One moment, the bit was grinding through solid stone. The next moment, it was grinding through nothing at all. The resistance dropped instantly and completely. The force he'd been bracing his whole body against just vanished, and the drill lurched forward several inches before he could stop it. The feedback through the tool went from a dense, heavy grind to something hollow, empty, open. He killed the power and froze with the bit exactly where it was. And in that silence, before he'd seen a single image, a careful man already understood he'd just opened something that was never meant to be opened. The only question left was whether he should look, and whether the thing on the other side wanted to be looked at. The sealed silence. He didn't widen the hole, not yet. First he listened, and this is the part that should stop you. No airflow moved through the opening. No echo came back when he leaned in close. No sound of anything shifting on the other side. Whatever was back there, it wasn't venting to the outside world. It wasn't connected to the open air through some hidden crack. It was sealed, contained. Here's why that mattered to him the way it should matter to you. A natural cavity in coastal basalt is almost never truly sealed. Water finds its way in. Air moves through it. Given enough time, the sea works into every weakness it can reach. A space that had stayed closed enough that not one breath of air stirred when he punched through, is a space that something kept closed, which meant whatever was inside hadn't seeped in from outside over the slow centuries. It had either always been there, or it had been put there.
Any doorway or hinges or anything like that, but there was the unmistakable sound of snoring coming from within the mountain.
Only then did he start to widen the entry point, carefully, just enough to feed a machine through, because whatever was on the other side of that wall, Kieran Orya had already decided one thing for certain. He was not going in after it himself. His eyes would go in. He, would not. The threshold. He fed a small tracked crawler through the opening, a camera on treads, low to the ground, its own lights mounted to the front. He let it settle, let the lens stabilize, and then he sent it forward into the dark, the same way you'd lower something into deep water when you don't know what's down there. The crawler was him now. Its lens was the act of entering he would never do with his own body. I have to be honest with you about why this part gets difficult to relay in full. What the camera recorded is not something that can be shown completely here, not because the footage is unclear, but because of what appears in the frame and what doesn't hold still long enough to be seen properly. What you're getting is already the limited version. I'll take you exactly as far as the description goes. The first stretch was almost ordinary, rough basalt, the kind you'd expect just inside any cavity. But the floor under the crawler was wrong in a quiet way. It was level, unnaturally level compared to the broken rock back at the entry point. Like something had once flattened it on purpose. This wasn't the chamber yet. This was the approach to it, a corridor, the threshold of whatever the door actually guarded. And then the crawler's lights found the first of the shapes. And ordinary was over. The suspended forms, they were hanging, suspended from somewhere above in a loose cluster, dull-surfaced, drinking the light instead of throwing it back. And the footage won't let them be seen cleanly. That's the problem. They don't hold still enough. There's a subtle inconsistency to them, a barely perceptible shift, as if their position isn't entirely fixed, even when nothing in that dead, sealed space should be moving them at all. Sit with that, because Orya did. Something was hanging in a space no air could reach, and it would not stay still. The floor beneath the forms was darker than the surrounding stone, stained, uneven, shallow pools of liquid scattered across it, breaking the crawler's light into fractured reflections. Orya pushed the unit on beneath the last of the hanging shapes, and for a brief moment the ceiling cleared and the light spread evenly again. Visibility improved, but only for a few meters. He kept the crawler moving, slow, deliberate. The way you'd move through a room you suspected wasn't empty. A man who'd spent his career insisting that stone behaves predictably was now steering toward things that didn't behave at all, in a place that should have been as dead as the inside of a tomb. Then the air itself turned against the camera. The air itself. It didn't announce itself as a wall or a boundary. It revealed itself through interference. The light from the crawler's lamp started scattering harder, diffusing outward into a faint haze. Edges softened, contrast dropped. Depth became almost impossible to judge. There was moisture suspended in that air, not heavy enough to fall as droplets, not yet, but dense enough to fog the camera's sense of distance. And the floor changed with it. The unnatural flatness gave way to subtle irregularities, the surface darkening in patches, drinking more light than the stone around it. The tracks began leaving faint impressions behind them, compressing a thin layer of something that wasn't rock and wasn't quite water either, gathered in shallow depressions with no flow direction and no source feeding it. Its color was hard to pin down, almost black under direct light, but when the angle shifted, faint variations surfaced. Tones that pulled away just slightly from the basalt around them, enough to suggest it wasn't simply water sitting on stone, and whatever it was, it had been in there with the door the whole time. The crawler moved again, and the tracks didn't grip the way they had. A slight delay between command and response, a subtle slip as the unit dragged itself forward through the dampened ground. And then the camera tilted up, and Orya saw the ceiling, the embedded lines. At first, it was easy to miss. The light caught something overhead that didn't match the texture around it. Something linear, something cutting straight across the natural flow of the rock. The camera tilted further up, and the pattern resolved. There were structures embedded in the ceiling, not hanging from it like the suspended forms, not protruding out of it, integrated into it, running horizontally across the space, intersecting the rock at regular intervals. They looked like beams, partly obscured by the surrounding material, but distinct enough to break the natural continuity of the basalt completely. And here's the part Orya's training would not let him explain away. Volcanic rock has rules. It cools, it contracts, it cracks along predictable lines, and every bit of its internal structure follows from the physics of how it formed. Nothing in those rules produces evenly spaced horizontal members that hold a straight line through curving stone. You can find geometry in basalt. The columns themselves are proof of that. But it's the geometry of stress and cooling, not the geometry of intent.
The valley filled up with lava until it was 100 meters deep. It was 1200 degrees Celsius. And it's like everything. If you boil a kettle, it'll cool down. The pool of lava had to cool down.
What the camera was showing him had the second kind. The spacing was consistent, measured, each beam positioned at intervals that mirrored the pattern of the suspended forms from earlier. And that's the implication you can't put back down once you've picked it up. The two things were connected. Whatever held those shapes up, whatever they were anchored to, ran through the ceiling itself, which meant the corridor wasn't the destination. It was the threshold. The beams confirmed there was a structured space beyond it, a chamber the door had been guarding all along, and the crawler was crawling straight into the mouth of it. The crawler pressed on beneath the embedded lines. The air grew heavier. Condensation gathered on the lens, droplets forming and merging into larger smears that shifted every time the unit moved. The image degraded, and Orya was forced to read motion and shape instead of detail. But he kept going. 10 meters from the entry point. 15. The signal held, mostly, with brief flickers of interference rippling through the feed before it steadied. Nothing sustained. Nothing that forced a stop, but enough to notice. And then something happened fast enough that it almost slipped past, unrecorded. The flare. A flare of light. Brighter than the crawler's own lamps, though not by much. It appeared ahead, just past the edge of the field of view. A sudden bloom that bounced off the moisture in the air and washed across the lens. And then it was gone. No source, no lingering glow, nothing left behind to explain it. Orya stopped the crawler, held position, waited. Nothing happened. The space ahead stayed dark and unchanged, so he scrubbed the feed back, isolating the frames where the flare appeared. And there it was. Consistent across multiple frames, not a glitch in the camera, not a reflection bouncing off the crawler itself. Something external, something that had been inside that sealed space with his machine, producing its own light. He started the crawler forward again, slow, toward the spot where the light had been. And the ground got worse. The tracks began to struggle, not failing outright, but working visibly harder for every inch. The surface under that thin liquid layer gave a little under the weight, bleeding away traction. The pooling deepened only slightly, but enough that the crawler dipped in places, one track losing grip for a moment before catching again. The signal degraded too, more noticeably now. Static crawled across the feed. The image distorted, recovered, distorted again. The further in it went, the less stable everything around it became, as if the chamber itself didn't want the machine going any deeper. And here's the detail Orya couldn't shake afterward. The flare had come from somewhere ahead. He was now driving his only camera straight toward whatever had made it. He had no idea what was producing light in a sealed space closed off from the world for longer than anyone could measure. He just knew that it had, and that it might do it again. Closer this time. Where it stopped, he pushed the crawler to roughly 20 meters in. That's where it stopped, and it did not stop because he chose to stop it. It lost traction completely. The ground simply stopped supporting consistent movement. The track spun, displacing the soft surface layer without carrying the unit any further forward. And at the same moment, the interference climbed to the point where losing the feed entirely became a real risk. 20 meters deep in a space he had no map of, with no second way in, he held position. He tried small adjustments. Nothing improved. So he made the call, and he started bringing the crawler back. He told himself the decision was purely practical. The unit was stuck. The signal was failing. Pushing further risked losing the machine entirely. All of that was true. But there's a difference between a machine that can't go forward and an operator who stopped wanting it to. And Orya has never been completely clear about which one applied in those last few minutes. He'd come to prove the space was empty. By the time the tracks gave out, he wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was trying to leave. The crawler retraced its path. The suspended moisture kept smearing the image the whole way, but the structure stayed visible as the unit retreated, the embedded ceiling lines passing overhead again, the dark, soft floor giving way to firmer ground. And then the suspended forms came back into frame, hanging there, unchanged. Except, again, not completely unchanged. The same subtle inconsistencies, the same shifts too small to be certain of, as if their position had never been entirely fixed in the first place, and never would be. The crawler passed beneath them and kept going until the narrow opening reappeared, faint outside light bleeding into the frame. And then it was back in open air. But the thing it had filmed was still in there, and the door was still out there. What he sealed. He didn't send the crawler back in. He didn't attempt a second pass. He pulled his equipment and he sealed the opening. Not permanently, but cleanly. Cleanly enough that from the outside, there was no visible sign anything had been done to the rock at all. No fracture lines, no leftover debris, no trace of a drill. The cliff face looked exactly as untouched as the day he arrived. He sealed it the way you'd close a door you were never sure you should have opened. And the stone door, the thing that started all of this, has not been recorded opening again since. No further movement, no new footage, nothing. But sit with the weight of this. If the corridor he reached was the threshold of a larger space, if the beams confirm a chamber the door had been guarding, then whatever is behind that stone door is not empty. It isn't a hollow. It isn't a natural void carved out by ordinary geology over millions of years. It's structured, it's deliberate, and it had been concealed inside solid volcanic rock the entire time, with one moving door as the only way in or out. There's no official record of any of this. No documentation, no published findings, no institution anywhere acknowledging the space exists. There's only a single account from a man who mapped the rock with his own hands, drilled through a thinner section of it, and sent a camera into whatever was waiting on the other side. He was careful about how he described what came back. Measured, precise. He hedged on everything he couldn't be sure of. The distances, the shapes, the light. But there was one thing he never hedged on. Not once. He never called it natural. And if the corridor was only the threshold, if that flooded approach with the beams in its ceiling leads to something larger still, then whatever sits behind that stone door hasn't been fully seen by anyone alive. The footage can't show everything. It physically can't. The lens distorts, the moisture interferes, depth compresses, and the light in that place behaves in ways it isn't supposed to. What ends up in the recording actually looks clearer than what Orya says he watched in real time. But even with all that uncertainty stacked up, the conclusion never wavered. There was something in there, and it was not supposed to be. So if that door opens again, if whatever mechanism let it move the first time decides to repeat itself, the real question isn't what will finally be revealed when it does. The question is, what's already been waiting on the other side this whole time? If you made it all the way here, I want to hear it from you. Do you think Kieran Orya drilled into something built? Or is there an explanation the geology can still account for? Drop it in the comments because I read them. And the best theories on this channel almost always come from you. And if this one got under your skin even a little, subscribe and stay close. The next door is always nearer than it looks.